drink, Joe?
You know I don't drink, Simon.
Well, one drink isn't going to hurt you.
Oh.
Hey, fella, ain't you drinking?
No.
Maybe you're too darn good to drink with us.
Maybe I am.
Well, here's one time you're gonna drink and like it.
I said I wasn't drinking.
Hey, you think you're a tough guy, but you don't look tough to me.
Hey guys, it's Matt. I'll probably show a few more video clips a little bit later. If you're driving or at work, you don't need to see them. They'll be brief, and I'll tell you exactly what you're looking at anyway. We'll have fun with this topic a little bit later, but for now, at least initially, I need to come across like I'm a sane, normal, rational human being. You see, my conclusions about why Prohibition was introduced are so strange and so bizarre to the regular person, I can only hope to offset that by sounding sane. And I still have this fantasy, you see, that someday I'll be able to debate an egghead Ivy League professor, say a history professor, that actually tells their students the textbook or the Wikipedia version as to how Prohibition was introduced, why it was introduced, why it was repealed. Do you believe there are actually university professors that still teach the Wikipedia version when what this system was actually out to do to people was so crystal clear to you and me? If there's any egghead professors in the Ivy League listening to the words that are coming out of my mouth, if you could set up a debate, sir, or ma'am, or madame, or whatever you want to call yourself, or whatever pronoun you attach to, I will, my own transportation costs, I'll get out to your facility. You just have to feed me once I get out there and put me up at a Motel 6.
It would turn out to be the most effective political pressure group in American history. His organization would focus on a single goal: to get rid of alcohol, period. Town by town, county by county, state by state, they would force America to go dry.
Well, in fear of losing anybody listening, let me get right to the conclusions to pique your interest, so you may decide to stick with me for the remainder of this presentation. Prohibition came in 1920. It, of course, banned the sale, distribution of alcohol, as we all know, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. I put forth the notion that the reason for Prohibition won't appear in any child's history book. It won't appear in no Wikipedia article. Matt, everybody, the government was looking out for people, right? The government cared about health and about moral standards and about societies that function. That has to be the reason, right? No, not at all. Let me put forth my bizarre take on Prohibition and then prove it on the back end to anybody that doesn't have their head up their ass. So the summary of my conclusions are as follows. The reason for Prohibition and the banning of alcohol in 1920 was 1. To increase drinking, to increase alcohol consumption tenfold over a 100-year period. 2. To create organized crime. Hey, I know this isn't sinking into anybody that doesn't think the way we do. Is he saying what I think he's saying? Yeah, just let it. I know it's not going through your normal filters. To increase drinking, number 1, I'll reiterate, to increase and create organized crime. Number 3, to destroy the United States Constitution, where one sees now the state can come in and do whatever it wants to the people. That's number 3. Number 4, as a test, so a governmental egregore can find out ways to gain more power over the population. And finally, to divide people, which is something it's been doing for thousands of years. See, guys, and just so you know, if I ever had the opportunity to debate the Ivy League eggheads, I would leave that part out, of course. I wouldn't. Once they would just attach to that and say, this guy's, he's out of his mind. This guy we paid to come up here and I'm debating with, he's proven to be insane. I would leave that part out, that it's been here for thousands of years. I wouldn't use terms like, Matt, you wouldn't say not milk, would you, if you were debating somebody at Cambridge or Oxford? I wouldn't say not milk. I would put it in a way, it would still be insane, me saying it's out to create organized crime. The facts would all line up with that. The facts would be irrefutable, if that's even a word. But I wouldn't sink our ship by using words like asshole dark and plumber's ass crack and not milk. I'd leave that shit out of it, just so you know.
The Anti-Saloon League was more or less modeled on the modern corporation that was already transforming American business. It had a national headquarters to direct its campaigns, a salaried full-time staff to oversee thousands of volunteers, ample financing from millions in annual dues, as well as church collections, and a printing plant at Westerville, Ohio, that churned out 300 tons of propaganda every month.
Okay, guys, 2 minutes or less on the facts, many of which in Wikipedia are correct, but the reasons behind it, of course, are all false. But just let me set a framework here that we can build upon. Some of the basics, most of which you'll know, some of which you won't. 2 minutes or less. Alcohol banned, 1920. Alcohol repealed, 1933. Oh, not again. Matt, let it go. Just give the history like you said you would. Okay, 20 out, 33 in. 13 years between 20 and 33. The amendment to the United States Constitution that banned it was the 18th Amendment. The one that brought alcohol back was the 21st Amendment. So we have 20 out, 33 back in, 13 years between, 18 out, which is the 3 sixes, 21 back in, the 21st Amendment, which it's just a coincidence. You're not one of those people. The 21st Amendment, which brought alcohol back, is the same drinking age that exists today in the United States. Now, look, guys, if I was debating the Oxford eggheads, I wouldn't be talking about weird gematria and all the shit that we look at that we know is part of how this reality works. Of course I wouldn't. It's no coincidence it was brought back in 1933. It's just how this reality does business. 13, all these stupid power numbers, I don't need to understand. We generate our own energy. I wouldn't say these things to the Cambridge and Harvard eggheads. I wouldn't embarrass you like that. No matter how perfect the rest of my argument would be, I know they would latch onto that insane stuff that they don't understand and say, this person that we brought here, that we put up the Motel 6 is insane. Yeah, okay. Matt, stop fantasizing in the middle of this presentation that you're doing a debate against these Ivy League ed. I can't stop fantasizing about it. I want it so bad. And then I want to start talking about the man in a cave. And then I want to start talking about how false 2020 was. And I want to debate them on all this stuff because it's frustrating. All we get to do is talk to ourselves. Matt, just stick to the history where we all agree before getting into your wacky theories. Okay. Finishing the history lesson. It was the Volstead Act. We've heard that name before. This is from Andrew Volstead. He was a member of the House of Representatives. Thou art a villain, Andrew Volstead, but they could have attached it to anybody. He's not the guy that did this or pushed for it. They just attach it to anybody's name in the Senate or the House, and it's attached to his name. Probably creepy gematria in that I don't care to look into. But his name was Andrew Volstead for the Volstead Act. That's what doomed it in 1920. And Andrew, if you're rolling around, thou art a villain. Here's some history that almost nobody knows. Russia had its own prohibition that started in 1914 under Tsar Nicholas II. Tsar Nicholas decreed in some way in 1914 that it was all state distributed. It was all vodka, the state distribution of vodka. It's just going to come to an end. And I guess they started implementing it around 1915. Guess what? Tsar Nicholas was dead as a doornail. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. One needs to understand this before going further with Scrooge. One needs to understand that son of a bitch only lasted 3 years after he took the vodka away from Russia. They don't mess around. What? Matt? There isn't one history book anywhere that talks about the end of the Tsar era having to do with the fact that he took the people's vodka away. Haven't you ever heard of Lenin and the rise of the Bolsheviks? Haven't you ever seen Dr. Zhivago, sir? The rise of the Bolsheviks, Lenin out there giving his bad speeches at the end of the caboose. Bad speech. Come with us, the Red Movement. To me, I'm a cause and effect guy, okay? I learned that from the Merovingian, Matrix 1. Morpheus causality. Matrix 1, you take people's drink away, especially in Russia. You try surviving January, February, and March, negative 25 degrees with just orange juice. It sucks, man. You take people's vodka away, I don't think it's a coincidence. 3 years later, that poor devil, Tsar Nicholas, was dead. Probably a whole hidden history about who Rasputin was that never appear in no history book, don't appear in no Wikipedia. Like Chuck D says, my heroes don't appear on no stamp. Rasputin was probably an alcohol distributor. He was probably a vodka distributor. Took away his damn livelihood. I'm not joking. Okay, you might not agree with certain takes on my Russian history. That's okay. Because the point was that nobody knows that Russia had their little prohibition just before America had theirs. That wouldn't be a test of the one world system the way it's the test of the central broadcasting system. Yeah. And there was actually 10 other countries or so that had their own little prohibitions at about the same time. But if you talk about a one-world system, you're one of those people. Here's another part of history most people don't know. My grandfather would have known this, but in the modern age, they were setting the stage for Prohibition 20 to 25 years, if not much, much further before. This thing here is very patient. What it wants to implement, it will not do overnight. It was setting the stage 20 to 25 to 30 years before for the Prohibition it knew would be coming. It probably had the date picked out. Albert Pike probably picked the date himself. But but most people don't realize, it's not this wave that happened very quickly. One of the big things happened in 1905 where the politicians would say, remember what happened to Herrick. Herrick, I forget his first name, was the Ohio governor. And because he took a moderate stance on, local communities not being able to ban alcohol, and it was already starting to happen locally to a degree. The politicians first were waging little battles, community by community or city by city, and this Herrick was a little bit of it's a heretic. Do you hear that name? And Herrick, yeah, it's how the reality does business. No, I would never embarrass you by making that sort of reference in my Ivy League debate. But it was 1905. He was wishy-washy on, I don't know what they were looking to accomplish in 1905. He was wishy-washy on the ills of alcohol. We'll just put it that way, even though they knew they had another 15 years before the full implementation of Prohibition. So then it started to circulate around the politicians. Remember what happened to Herrick. If you don't bow down to what certain political movements...
Any politician who dared oppose the League, Howard Russell promised, would live to regret it. The Anti-Saloon League, he said, was formed for the purpose of administering political retribution.
Because they had such a devoted following, a following that was moved by religion, and there's no more powerful force to get people to act, they were able to say to politicians, are you with us or are you against us? And if you are against us, we will defeat you.
Now, the political movements, which took the form of women's groups that eventually, I guess, became suffrage groups, that took the form of religious organizations and Protestant churches. No, it's not. It wasn't. Of course, this is so not Nilk. It screams of not Nilk, or at least the powers that be behind the curtain, that run presidents, that run governments. They'll make it seem like it was this grassroots movement of morality. No, they used the churches, the not Nilk. It screams of the screen, the powers that be here in the shadows, and the not Nilk. That people will believe, and the history books will present, that it was just grassroots morality movements. That is the mechanism and the infrastructure they used to do it, but to say it came from that is ridiculous. Everybody in our community today sees the 8 billion-pound gorilla, which is the propaganda arm of the screen today. Social media and TV and movies and series and pushing their agendas and pushing their pronouns. Okay, we see it. Back in the day, their tools in this regard were very limited. That's why people like H.G. Wells were so famous. The next phase of the propaganda would come through his book, a book that they knew a huge percentage of the population would read. The first bit of Prohibition propaganda can be traced back, this is incredible, 1854. Remember, 1920 was Prohibition. 1854, the book was called 10 Nights in a Barroom and What I Saw There. The 1854 book was later turned into a gigantic Broadway play, which then became a 1931 movie.
Come on, let's have another. Sure makes you feel happy, all right. Yeah. Not half as hard to take as the first one was.
The book, play, and then movie are about the ills of alcohol, alcoholism, families destroyed, good man goes bad after taking his first drink. And I can hear you wanting to talk to me. Matt, just because there's a book that came out around 1850, that doesn't mean they were plotting and planning what would come. Prohibition 70 years in advance. And this book was absolutely a tool for the prohibition they knew that would be coming. I hear you. It might be more like a Hamilton thing, or a way you can interpret the Hamilton play, that they knew Prohibition was coming, say, 20 years out, not 70 years out. Okay, I know that's a stretch. But then they comb over everything. They say, what can we use? Not that we have to write our propaganda from scratch. Oh, what's this book that exists? Oh, it's a book called 10 Nights in a Barroom and What I Witnessed, the ills of alcohol and the bar fights and the families destroyed and the alcoholism and the destroyed health and lives. And the Not Know probably says, we can take this book and bring it into prominence, maybe like some interpretations of Hamilton. Although because of what Hamilton represents, the Federal Reserve Bank, it might have been planned from scratch. Let's forget about those details for now. So the Occam's razor explanation with the not nilk slant is that this book existed, and it was existing propaganda, and they said, we can use this. The book, if you read it from first page to last page, probably isn't very good. I've never read it, but they said, let's promote this into a big, huge play. And just like we did with Hamilton, we'll convince people it's wonderful and they'll want to go see it. And then they'll walk out, even though it was an absolute piece of shit. They'll walk out saying it was wonderful and they were so glad they saw it, just like they fooled everybody with Hamilton. Then they put the movie out, 1931. Maybe just they knew they had to hold on, right, to 1933. People were getting restless. They knew they couldn't keep alcohol away or banned forever in the United States. They just had to hang on, of course. It's so important they get to the 1933. They were ready, and they released the movie in 1931. And it was a key propaganda piece. It really was influential, all planned out. Probably not planned out as early as 1854 when the book was written, and I can hear some of you saying, Matt, they're capable of that. They are capable of that. They're capable of almost anything, these weird creeps. But they probably latched onto something that already existed. Either way, it doesn't matter. This piece of shit turd became Hamilton-type propaganda to keep the prohibition going, or to introduce the prohibition in the first place. I don't know what the exact date is on this piece of shit play. Maybe they did that before 1920. Okay, going back to the first few minutes of this presentation, remember, I had 5 insane reasons why I believe Prohibition was brought to the United States. One of the reasons was a test on how populations can be manipulated so it can learn, so it can gain more power over how politicians are influenced, over existing systems, populations, grassroots movements, so it can learn the way the AI is learning from real humans now. That was on my list. So let's continue the mini history lesson here just a few more minutes, and that will transition as, say, evidence that one of my crazy 5 ideas of why prohibition was introduced is actually legitimate. But as usual, what we call the not nilk here, and I wouldn't use that word with the Princeton professor, it gives itself away. The dark reality always gives itself away. In this regard, we have symptoms of the one world system. We have Russia doing it a few years before. A test, I'm sure a test, because the most important play or act of the play is the United States. It always is, or it has been for a long time. So where should we test it out on these poor devils? Test it out on Russia. Take their vodka away? Take the vodka away from those poor devils. And we can learn something about how populations react, what to say to them, how to quell them, how to push back. And then we can bring that to the United States. The one world system always gives itself away. It doesn't give itself away 100 years ago like it does today. It's so obvious today that you think anybody without their head up their ass, like our entire family and group of friends, everybody should be able to see the way it operates today, how artificial it is. But that's why we put forth weird theories like the download and the frequency in the radio station, because it's so bizarro. There's no explanation for why people can't see right through it except for us. No, I wouldn't use terms like the download in debating the Dartmouth history professor. I wouldn't embarrass you like that. Matt, what else gives reality away? I'm glad you asked. Okay, that what we just covered was the one world system aspect. But this aspect is there's like a certain power structure here that's above presidents, that's above the Senate and congressmen, above governments. The old money still exists, a power structure kind of above everything, and they lay down the laws the way they want, the way the Rothschilds said, I don't care who makes the laws, it only matters who makes the money. That sort of shit, that sort of creepy shit proves it right here. It's proven every day as we watch our news in 2023, but it's proven back in Prohibition because the way they laid the law down was for themselves, was for the ultra-rich or those that pull the puppet strings. The law, the Volstead Act, talks about the illegality of manufacturing alcohol, of producing it, of putting the ingredients together, of distributing it, that sort of language. What about drinking it and consuming it? No problem. I researched it. Okay, several different places said in the law itself, this is what my research shows. I never heard this before. It's new to me. But it's funny how they just slipped this through the history books. Never really understood this when we learned about Prohibition in 7th grade, did we? Consuming it, no problem. See how that gives away the power structure? Then when you know the law is coming, like the top power structure does, all you've got to do is stockpile 13 years of alcohol. You're not affected at all. Your parties aren't affected at all. See, the struggling man on the street, he could probably afford, if scrounge up enough money to get 3 bottles of vodka in storage. And he'd blow through that in just a week. Then he got nothing. Then you got to go to speakeasies, manufacture, and he's trying to make some in his bathtub using these horrible ingredients. And nobody can manufacture or distribute under the language of this Volstead Act. They'll break your door down because you're trying to make a fifth of vodka in your bathtub. On one end of the bathtub, kid's trying to take a bath. He got soap. The other end of the bathtub, he's got like a section it off. It's become like a makeshift still. He's trying to make his vodka. The feds will break the door down to some regular person, put the father in jail. The kids then have to go on Skid Row. They'll go after the little guy. But see, all the rich people, even the lower level rich, you knew they got wind a year before this thing was coming. They said, it's no problem. We're going to put in the law. You can consume all you want. Just buy up what you need. For how long should I buy up? Well, if I had to guess, and not that this was a script or laid out or anything, they're talking to the middle level rich at this point. If I had to guess, stock up for 13 years. 13 years? Yeah, 13 years. Okay. We'll buy 100 cases of whiskey, 100 cases of vodka. Won't affect the bar mitzvah party. Won't affect the damn weddings. They stocked up, completely legal to drink it. I want to make sure that's crystal clear. Manufacturing alcohol, distilling, fermenting, shipping, distributing, illegal, drinking the shit, getting drunk off your ass, just drinking it and consuming, no problem. Why would you put that in the law? So this Columbia University professor that I'd be debating, and most of them are actually, remember the weathermen, the Weather Underground? I think half of the faculty and staff at Columbia University are weathermen, and many came off death row to teach at Columbia University. He's saying, this person's obviously a conspiracy theorist, and they're crazy in their viewpoints, and you would be crazy to alter our view of history because of what this man presents. Then, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but or madame, or whatever pronoun you want to associate with, why would the law, if they just care about health and it came through Puritan movements and morality and it came through the Protestant church, why would the law not have a line about consuming? Isn't that ultimately what it was out to do from these grassroots movements and the end of drunkenness and 10 nights in a bar room and your propaganda like that? Why not did you just forget to add the sentence that you can't consume? Oh, if there's this power structure that these conspiracy people talk about, then that would affect you. And maybe not the top level power, the people that set the laws, but a lot of their friends underneath. So the fact that it's not there, the consumption part, as being associated or attached to the illegality, I'm sorry, as crazy as you think my theories are, that's one for me. So to wrap up, the least interesting of my 5 crazy points, putting forth why Prohibition was really put forth in 1920, one says here, as a test, to learn how to create more power and influence. Probably tested it initially in Russia, took whatever they learned from Russia and around the world, brought it to the main act of the play, or the main stage at Woodstock, the United States. Learn how grassroots movements, certain political pressures, all cooked up, all derived from the Not Milk itself, all funded by and powered by the George Soroses of the day. There were people like George Soros and that sort of creep funding weird movements back. Of course there were. Yeah. He's the great-great-great-grandson of the original creeps that were doing it way back when, funding the movements that the Not Milk wanted. But understanding how not everybody in Congress is in on it and the Senate is in on it. Maybe they didn't have access to certain frequencies or downloads. They had to do it the old-fashioned way. Political pressure, influence, seeing how congressmen and senators can bow down in fear of their political lives, because what they got these grassroots groups to do was, first they attacked locally. Oh, if you don't take our stance on alcohol, it's very similar to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD today. But MAD is 1/1,000,000th the size. It's very, very small. It's probably a lingering little residual of Prohibition, MAD. Honestly, probably is. Remember the key slogan, and the Not Milk made this famous because it needed to. Remember what happened to Herrick, the governor of Ohio in 1905, for going against certain prohibition waves that were coming even 15 years before it actually hit. And all the politicians, they wake up screaming at the middle of the night, remember what happened to Herrick? Oh, it's best if I need to keep my job. So it's best these movements, these grassroots movements, these politicians are probably saying to themselves, grew into political monsters much larger than I can ever anticipate. Well, the politician can't figure out why the political movement got so powerful because it doesn't understand who's funding it, what kind of real evil, creepy power is behind it. But then they're saying, remember what happened to Herrick. And they're saying, well, it's easier for me just to vote against all alcohol. And whenever a vote comes up of any kind, to say I'm for the prohibition movements, even 15 years out, and to make sure then they keep their job. This is how Not Milk, with very few tools it has to work with back in the day compared to what it has to work with today, understanding how to manipulate systems, in this case, the political system. When you do research on this topic, you see this 15-year, again, grassroots movement with the fundamental basis of it being, I think, the Protestant church, morality, then little mantras and little slogans like the temperance movement, the anti-saloon league, and everybody like my friend Tony and your best friends and family just believe it all just organized on its own. Saudi Arabia after World War I, well, just makes perfect sense, just organized on its own. No, this sort of the juggernaut of the political movement that would eventually lead to prohibition, I'm sure will be assigned to this person. Oh, this person was a genius. This person was like the Martin Luther King of their day regarding the prohibition movement. No, a movement like this, these grassroots don't gain that sort of power and organization unless this creepy-ass thing called the Not Milk or the screen is behind it. Okay, Matt 1, Dartmouth Egghead 0. Let's go to number 2, a much more obvious one from our perspective, but something that would be even more rejected by your Aunt Ginny or the guy down the cul-de-sac, when I would say it was put in place to increase or to create whole facets of organized crime. Now, I agree, this is one where the Brown professor that I'm debating is never going to come around and say, Matt, I see you. I see where you're coming from. It was to create organized crime. It was to create Al Capone. It was to create the mob and make the mafia thousands of times more powerful. I'm coming around. I understand there's never going to be a meeting of the minds here. Yeah, I don't expect whoever I would be debating to meet me halfway here. Yeah, I could see the government doing that. If they come an inch in my direction, they would have to see how strange it is that the government would put something in place like prohibition when everybody knew that it would lead to a 10,000-fold increase in organized crime. Everybody knew it. If a first grader in elementary school could have seen it coming. A product that is like a central part of almost every household, not that the father drinks and the mother, but the brother upstairs, somebody drinks in the household. It's part in some way of every family in the country, every household in the country in some way. You remove that, and there's not going to be an organized crime element to fill the void. See, it's so obvious that that was coming, and they knew it was coming, that I would say it's intentional. Again, I'm not going to get anybody to meet me halfway. You guys would, but my friend Tony or anybody else wouldn't. But here's the point. You have to weigh the organized crime that you know is coming, the Al Capones, the Tommy guns, the increase in the mob, the mafia, with what you're trying to do. So you're trying to look out for the people. I mean, this is what, obviously, they're not out to look out for anybody's health. They don't care about that. They're not looking out for the people. That's the presentation. That's what the history book would say. So the first part of this is just obvious, that if there was any unsurety in terms of the United States Senate or Congress as to what would happen with organized crime. They could have brought in 5 people, any 5 people from the FBI, and it said, your testimony, sir, what will happen to organized crime if we do this thing called Prohibition in the 18th Amendment? And anybody, they could pull like a canine sniffing dog out, and it would say, oh, organized crime is going to go up like 1,000,000%. I mean, everybody knew that. So is that a trade-off that makes sense? We want to keep alcohol away from the people because we care about health, yet we're going to put 100,000 new, quote, men with Tommy guns, thugs and killers into the ranks of organized crime, and that's a fair trade-off? It's not a fair trade-off. That's far worse than protecting people and their health and their livelihood from alcohol. That's far worse. And once the infrastructures are put in place, the infrastructures are there to stay. The only excuse they would have is they didn't know. They thought it would increase organized crime a little bit, but not nearly. Oh, sure. Like when you remove a key central product from every household in the country, nobody could predict that organized crime would come in to fill the void. Yeah. See, because they knew it, you have to, I'm just talking to the average person that doesn't see the world the way we see it. Because they knew it, then doesn't that take a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the history presentation that they were just doing it because they cared about people? Okay, Aunt Ginny's never going to meet me in the middle in here. We could just go round and round forever, but you understand the point that at least I would try to make. Number 3, Prohibition was put in place as the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution to increase drinking. Yes, I didn't get that wrong. To increase alcohol consumption, both in the short term and the long term over, say, a 100-year period. Here's a psychological principle that you don't need to be no undergraduate major in Freud's psychoanalysis, the University Wien or Vienna or whatever it is. It's Wien to me. You don't need to understand this stuff. Every second grader knows that if you make something scarce, make it taboo, a whole segment of society will want it more and will indulge in it more. This is the reason why the party atmosphere in every single major college campus is off the charts, thousands of kids dead jumping off roofs, whatever, alcoholism. It does not exist to the same degree at all in other parts of the world, where certain parts of Europe, where it's not that uncommon to give, your 12-year-old a glass of wine or something, or your 14-year-old a glass of wine. They've had alcohol in certain parts of Europe their whole lives. It's not as taboo as it's been created to be in the United States. So what's happening at major college campuses now, universities, of course, is exactly what played out during Prohibition. I go up to Penn State. I'm not 21. Oh, every single party, keg after keg after keg. I've seen more people passed out and jumped off roofs. And Tony, the guy I was telling you about, I gave him a ticket to come to the Penn State football game with me. I got him a ticket because he was at a branch campus for a few years. He was so drunk. I'm not joking. He's passed out in the bathtub. I have a picture of it. I had to sell his ticket on the way into the game. He couldn't even go into the game with us. There's so much over drinking. The taboo nature. You make it legal for 18-year-olds, the alcoholism would go down 40%. Okay, I hear you. Initially, it would spike up. Okay, for 2 years, sure, it would spike up. All the college kids would go crazy. But then you'd have a 100-year benefit after that. That the dorm parties would stop and they'd go into the bars, and the law would be, well, if you go to a major college campus and you're 18, you can drink. Okay, it spikes up like crazy for 2 years. Then it comes to an end. So this isn't that much fun anymore. They'd mostly be forced to go into bars. Who can afford $7 a drink? It would come down and down and down. It's this endless excitement, the taboo nature, knowing we could get caught. It made, as a youngster, living off that sort of hormone, it made it 10 times more fun, the fact that it was illegal. No doubt about it. That if they knew this, they knew this going into Prohibition. They knew that the speakeasy would pop up and they would be over, and you only had an hour, or you had to get home or something. But then instead of having maybe your 2 or 3 drinks, they'd throw down 6 or 8. I guarantee Prohibition led to double the alcoholism because of the taboo nature of it. I doubt you'll find that in the history books. This isn't some crazy theory I'm putting forth. Every second grader that ever attended a university, Wien or whatever, to me it's Wien. What the hell's Vienna? W-E-I-N. I don't see how Vienna relates to W-E-I-N, but I don't know. Any first grader that ever flunked out of that school knows that the taboo nature and the scarcity of it creates an atmosphere where there would be overindulgence in it. There is no doubt, in my opinion, that the number one cause of alcoholism in the United States, and there are many causes, but to me the number one is the party atmosphere at the major universities. I've been through it. As you get older, every great time you had and the reminiscing of the old days was about some party or some girl you met, and it carries nostalgia. You want to do away with it. You really care about people. Allow 18-year-olds going to a major university to drink. Spikes up for 2 years, then spikes down by 40, 50, or 60%. Then has lasting benefit throughout the rest of that adult's life, through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. The party atmosphere actually creates a stigma or something associated with alcohol at a party that carries through for the rest of someone's life. They know this. Let's say you just disagreed with everything I said. It's all second-grade psychological principles, but let's just say you disagreed. How about the effect on alcohol when it's given back? Let's just say people aren't drinking. Oh, Matt, it really worked. Yeah, there weren't these speakeasies. People didn't learn to do all these stills, and Fred down the road wasn't making alcohol. No, everybody could still get it, of course. Of course. Let's just say you believe the history that, there was a lot of it went dry. Okay. Well, what happens when it's brought back then in 1933? The people, then it's like the way they, return the world to people that believe what Dr. F put forth, and how wonderful it is now to go back out to a concert, how wonderful it is to be in groups, how wonderful it is to go back into the NFL. There's a new appreciation for something when something is taken away. So how about the new appreciation in a whole segment of the population for alcohol because it was taken away, or thinking it could be taken away again? There's a psychological thing about, again, it is about scarcity, where it's more appreciated when it's given back. So you have a double whammy in terms of increasing the amount of drinking in the United States because of Prohibition. The only excuse, if I was debating somebody at a podium, the only excuse they would have is they didn't know this would. I mean, they couldn't argue the basic facts of what I'm saying, that these two major factors increased drinking potentially for 100 years from 1933 when they repealed it. They could only say, well, they didn't know. Oh, sure. Every single psychological study, Freud wasn't coming then in 1970. All these Freudian principles go back, way back when. You had Edward Bernays. They knew all about this sort of basic, and it's not complicated psychiatry and psychology. It's first grade stuff. Because, of course, they knew that the effects would be ultimately there would be much more drinking long past the 21st Amendment and Prohibition's repeal. Then why is it so crazy for someone like me to say it was intentional? A defender of reality, the Palace Guard, constantly just makes excuses. Well, Matt, your crazy theory couldn't possibly be right. Again, it's always corruption. It's always ineptitude. It's always incompetence. Yeah, every single time. Yeah, I agree, Matt. Common sense always does line up with your conspiracy argument, but that couldn't be right. There's no way the world can really work like that. Let's just go back to Russia. Let's just say there was this evil group. You think Vladimir Putin, he loves his people. People here think that Russians are evil, right? And their leadership and the oligarchy and the czars, they're evil, right? Well, how would you get, if you wanted Russians over a 50-year period to drink a lot more, how would you get that to happen? You'd take it away and then give it back. It's kindergarten stuff, but we're just one of those people. Number 4, to destroy the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution to a millennial or to a Generation Z, whatever that generation is after millennial, that's just some ship anchored. It's just some ship anchored in Baltimore Harbor. The Constitution. They don't know what it is. But back in the day, people, my generation and before, back in the day during Prohibition, a whole year of their schooling was probably on the Constitution, and they believed they have these rights and the Bill of Rights, and they learned all about it in 1920 in school and everything. Okay, it was a big part of going to grade school. Well, then there's no constitutional basis that existed where the government could come in and say, whatever you choose to buy this product on the open market, we're going to remove it from the market, take it away. They had no basis, so they had to put an amendment. See, the first 10 amendments is the Bill of Rights. Then the 11th Amendment, which nobody understands. The 12th Amendment, which nobody, well, that had to do with something about electing a president, which is more not nilk. 13 is the only one that makes sense. No slavery. Okay, that's the only amendment that should exist. No slavery is the 13th. And 14, then up to the 18th, finally destroyed the Constitution, saying, well, see, you poor devils believed you had freedoms in this thing called the Constitution, but we're going to show you via an amendment we can slap on whatever provision we want. Oh, Bill of Rights don't exist. We can slap on an amendment whenever we want that take your rights away, and we're going to show you we can do whatever we want to you poor devils. And you better be satisfied with the 18th, the Prohibition. I mean, we'll keep adding these amendments. Shit, we'll put an amendment out next week, make the 19th, the 20th, the 21st, the 20th. We'll put an amendment out that all men over 6 feet tall from Boston all the way up to Maine have to, on Tuesdays, wear a red dress and pumps. See, we can do whatever we want with these damn amendment things. It's like kid in candy store, these amendments. You better be satisfied with what we put out. We'll put an amendment on that says you got to crawl to work. See, these amendments allow complete alteration of the Constitution. You can slap on the back end anything to nullify the front end. Do whatever you want with these amendments. The first amendment that should have been, they should have got their heads together if anything were real after the Bill of Rights. It should have been the 11th, not this weird thing about the feds can't sue the states or some bullshit from the 11th. The 11th should have said, we need to add one on to the Bill of Rights and says there didn't need to be severe limitation on this amendment process because it appears these legislatures, and I know the states have to ratify and all that. Oh, yeah, okay. Not nil can't see to that. These amendments can get out of control. In the future, there could be amendments against cisgendered. I'm not joking. Number 5, its old playbook to divide people and put them into camps. Every generation has multiple things where a family sits down at the table to break bread, and these 2 family members are strongly believe this, and these 5 family members strongly believe that, and then they fight over political issues, and they fight over what's being introduced as a potential amendment to the United States Constitution. Just another divide and conquer. No, I think alcohol should be banned. No, don't you believe in freedom, Dolores? Divide, divide, divide at every single turn. It is the play and the run up the middle in the Not Nilk playbook. At the end of the day, if anything were real, a few smaller grassroots movement, not funded by Not Nilk itself or George Soros grandfather types, would have approached certain senators and congresspeople, and they would have said, we need to ban alcohol. We've banned alcohol locally in these towns and this part of Oklahoma, and it's working well. And the senators and the congresspeople would meet with these grassroots groups, and if anything were real, they would say, look, we're a country founded on freedom. And when in doubt, we must choose freedom, even if people are out to harm themselves. See, isn't it, they could have just said in this one meeting, and then it would have gone away. If anything were real, just would have gone away. Some senator would have said, I remind you, Madame, that Ben Franklin said, God gave us beer, I think, because he loves us. The founding fathers were all down with it. We all have a drink from time to time. And see, when in doubt, because of the way this country was founded, we have to choose freedom. If there's any doubt at all, we need to choose freedom and personal responsibility, even if that leads to people harming themselves. So do you see why we can't make this a national issue? Now, the feds, we won't interfere. If you decide to do this locally for your town, that's why local jurisdictions exist, and states have different laws. This is something that we'll give to the states. If a group in Arizona wants to live with dry, then make Arizona dry. But we'll keep this away from a federal issue. Okay, when in doubt, see, from a federal perspective, we have to always err on the side of freedom and personal responsibility. Do you see how simple? Now I'm talking to you folks. I'm not the person talking to the Protestant group visiting the office of the U.S. Senate. Do you see how simple everything in history is if people are allowed to do the right thing? And the world is as it's really presented in the history book, not this Not Nilk abomination. See how simple it would be? You see how artificial it would be that this movement against alcohol could gain such traction from the grassroots without it all being cooked up by Not Nilk. Oh, sure. Such traction that it was able to be ratified as a constitutional amendment, which takes, what does it take, 2/3 of the states? I mean, of course, the politicians that really voted against it or voted for prohibition against alcohol really voted that way. They did. That showed the influence was so massive. It came from the power structure that exists in the shadows. No grassroots movement could do that. take away a product that basically every household in some form or another, somebody's brother, sister, uncle, mother, grandfather has alcohol in the house, take a product away from basically every single family in this country. People think that could happen naturally from a grassroots perspective. All of reality is given away just from that, without all the other crazy shit that we talk about. Once again, you dive in to the weeds in a certain issue or a certain history presentation, and you apply a little common sense, it all breaks down as an absolute joke. And you guys usually see it generally the way I do, because we see through this reality. But if there was anybody I was debating, they might think there's merit in 2 or 3 of these points, a little bit of merit. But 1 or 2 or 3 of the other points would be so insane to anybody that I would bring this up to, or the Ivy League professor I'd be debating, that they would say, okay, this person would have to be so gone, so mentally institutionalized to come forth with a few of these that it means their entire argument across the board has no merit. One of the main tactics for those that we would ever discuss any topic with, those that we call the Palace Guard or want to defend their worldview, beware, anybody new, one of the main tactics is to wait for you to say something that crosses that line into what they consider to be crazy. Then, like a wolverine, they'll latch on to that one point and they'll just not let it go. Oh, because you said this, then your last hour, the talk we had for the last hour is just flushed. They'll wait for one little thing that gets a little crazy. They'll latch on to it, and then they'll use that to flush your entire argument. Because that little portion went too far, was a little bit too crazy, then all the other common sense points you were making have no merit. And it just allows the person to continue to get back on the frequency, to maintain the radio station, to maintain their download, and to be able to sleep at night. In the old days, we'd just say, well, people would still come to me. It's absurd in this community and say, Matt, people really do want to know the truth, but they're afraid and they know the truth is out there, but they just don't want to look at it. They put their head in the sand. They want to protect their worldview. No, that psychological argument doesn't work anymore. No, they don't deep down know the truth and just try to avoid it. Not at all. When I had that long debate with Tony about V'ger 1 and 2 still sending their signals back 1 billion miles away, 35 to 40 years past the life expectancy of what NASA said, it's not like somebody would still come, Matt, deep down your friend Tony knows there's nothing out there, but he doesn't want to live in that sort of world, so he protects his worldview for the sake of raising his family and his kids. Nope, absolutely not. I assure you, every fiber of his being believed 100% that there were 2 toasters out there billions of miles away in the Mork from Ork system sending back signals somehow. This object's moving at 60,000 miles an hour. This object's moving the other direction at 100,000 miles an hour, sending something. He believed every bit of it. The Palace Guard thoroughly believes in what they're defending. It's not just, they know, but they don't want to look. No, not at all. It is much more like the download or the invasion of the body snatchers. So, Matt, how did you get on this topic? How did this come to be? Yeah, I've never talked about it. It's always been very interesting to me how this possibly could have been accomplished. It was Boardwalk Empire. Boardwalk Empire, it's an HBO series. I watched it when it first came out. Back then, there were so many good things to watch. I didn't think much of it. But now, because everything is so horrible, so in the trash, I start watching Boardwalk Empire again with, Steve Buscemi, whatever, about Atlantic City bootlegging during the Prohibition. It's friggin' phenomenal compared to the absolute trash that's on TV now. So I forget a lot about it. I've only watched the first episode. It's like truth drop, lower level, truth drop, truth drop, truth drop, truth. So they count down. It's right at the start of Prohibition. He's this dirty, low-life Atlantic City. That's like an oxymoron, right? Or just as a given that every Atlantic City politician is not the somebody you want to present to your daughter. So he's the treasurer of Atlantic City, and he's involved in all this illegal stuff. Of course, as soon as Prohibition comes, he's going to get right in on the action, on the bootlegging, and start doing deals with the mafia and the New York mob. It's like a truth drop right off the bat, where they show, the countdown, midnight tonight, Prohibition starts, and there's a bar, and Steve Buscemi's there as the treasurer or whatever, And it's like 3, 2, 1, and I don't think it went in on January 1st. It went in off January 1st, but they did a countdown like the ball was dropping. Okay, now we're in Prohibition, and everybody just holds up their glass and gets another drink. And although you could say, well, Matt, the feds aren't going to bust the doors down the first few seconds. I hear you, of course, but I just felt there was something else being said in that scene. Not just about that night. Like, yeah, they would keep drinking and knowing the feds are going to allow that first night, of course. But there was something else being said, kind of like, well, to me, what the message I got was the drinking just continues, at least for certain groups, in certain circles. And if you're above a certain level in terms of the control structure of this world, then the drinking just continues. Nothing stops. There's, as I talked about before, that I don't think the law is about consumption. It's about distribution and manufacture and putting the ingredients together, etc. So other truth drops, I think just that, and this is actually, some history even admits this, just the next day or 2 days later, there were hundreds of organized crime organizations or mob or mafia. I mean, literally seconds in some cases that night, they're pushing their establishing or pre-establishing their bootleg operations. So you could say basically the day after Prohibition, the size of organized crime in the United States increased 20% overnight. Well, Matt, the feds couldn't have predicted that would happen. No, they couldn't have predicted what a first grader could predict. Like all of a sudden the school stops selling candy and the first grader, you say to the first grader, what's going to happen now that your little school stops selling candy and sodas? Well, this guy Bruno and Johnny over here, I know they'll bring the shit in and we'll go locker to locker and buy it. The little kids know how to get their bootleg shit, but the FBI, the feds, they had no idea that this would happen to organized crime. And if you think they did have an idea, then is it so crazy for people like me to say it was on purpose? Thanks for listening.